With Brendan Fraser in the limelight again, it felt like time to talk about one of my favorite comfort movies, Monkeybone. Comfort for me, and I realize it's probably not that for the vast majority of people. It's a weird one, but if you like Henry Selick's work, it's worth a watch. To me, Monkeybone is about grief. You know, it's a movie about what it's like to have a loved one taken from you, and what it feels like to watch your body be taken over by your least favorite aspects of yourself. What it takes to fight and claw your way back out of that mental hole. There's also something to be said for being an artist and having people who genuinely care about you not understand when you don't want every single aspect of your life to be monetized. That very specific frustration and invasion is a big theme in this movie. A lot of losing control over yourself, losing autonomy, both bodily and creatively. I come back to Monkeybone whenever something traumatizing happens to me. It's not really a conscious thing, just that this movie happens to line up really well with some horrible things in my personal history. Our main character, Stu, suffers from horrific nightmares. He paints them to get them out of his head, and it's a lot of medical, body horror sort of nightmares, which were mine too. I was dealing with a lot of scary medical stuff as a child, so that obviously changed my brain quite a bit. I would draw to get it out, especially when I had so much trouble speaking. For a really long time, talking was hard. But I could draw. I eventually developed an entire dream world, and I'd often lucid dream, just wandering around these horrible places in my head. And that's what I've been drawing here. Just a room with a hand chandelier. The hand chandelier. You know, normal stuff. I knew the streets, I knew the stores, I knew the version of my school that I'd often wind up inside. I called my nightmare world Cornsbrook. It's a town that comes up in my comics and stories now as an adult. And it's a terrible place to get stuck in. In Monkeybone, Stu winds up in a coma, which sends him into downtown, which is similar to Cornsbrook in some ways, including being populated by his own creations. The movie came out in 2001, so I was already in high school when I first saw it. I was immediately taken by the idea that I wasn't the only one to feel like this character. Important to note, the character Monkeybone himself arrives when Stu's love interest asks him to draw with his non-dominant hand, just to see what comes out. And well, what comes out turns into a hit cartoon series for Stu, along with the good and the bad that comes with that. The first time I ever rewatched the movie, it was in 2005, when I got kicked out of art school on a forced medical leave. I was told by my doctor that I'd never be able to draw again. And after sinking deep into depression, I taught myself to write legibly with my left hand, and even did a couple of paintings. I also realized that I could still reasonably and reliably draw Deadray, the Cornsbrook killer, who was my way of venting for a few years. He was my Monkeybone. He hasn't gotten a hit show, at least not yet, but people knew my comic at the time, and that was enough for me. So, he's in this room too. Eventually, I regained use of my right arm, and I learned to pace myself. It's been almost 20 years, and I haven't had a problem like that since. I saw the movie again in 2012, after I almost died on the other side of the country. I had gone there to feel healthier, and it worked for a while. I wound up unable to swallow anything without pain, until I couldn't even swallow my own saliva. I went to 2 different doctors where I was, and neither used a scope to see what was wrong with my throat. One even said it was all in my head. And someone I considered a dear friend, who was like a brother to me, was all too ready to write me off as a lost cause and dead. Kind of like Stu's sister in the movie. I moved back home. It was a different movie that I consider the reason I got off my butt to get back home, but that's a story for another time. After I saw a doctor who used a scope to actually see the problem, I started to get better. It was not an easy process. And a lot of my healing had to do with my friends and Rob. And I still often felt like I just wasn't myself anymore. Like something terrible was piloting my body. And that's when I watched Monkeybone again. Because I knew that Stu would know what that was like. This was also when I started turning my journal into the script for Entropy Head. 5 years later, my mother died in a hit and run. I wanted to watch Monkeybone again. You'd think it would be triggering, given that there's a car accident that sends Stu into the coma, but it was comforting to think there was somewhere else to go. It was comforting to think death had a face you could talk to. Death is played by Whoopi Goldberg, for the record. It was comforting to think that even when I was struggling to remember myself and fighting from the inside to do all the work it would take to get better, there were people on the outside fighting just as hard to let me know I was loved. There were people waiting for me outside of my downtown. The perspective on this piece is wonky. But, you know, when you're in a dream and you can't really walk too well, everything seems off-kilter anyway, so I'm letting it go. And some stories, finished or not, are represented in those pictures on the walls. The half-head dog is here. His tail is wagging, he's always happy, he's not noticing what we all see, or maybe it just doesn't matter. Feel free to ask about any aspect of this in the comments, because I've got answers. Anyway, I recently got diagnosed with thyroid cancer. I have been told it is the ice cream of cancers. It's still scary. And I decided now was the time to do this video. I like to get personal at the end of the month with story time, so please consider this a little like that. I'll be okay. I'm scared. But I have support, and I have Cornsbrook. And I'm gonna hold on to that. Rock on.